G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talk Stuff, Ukraine War Update for the 16th of September. The war rages on and people are actually asking what's going on about Istanbul. Now, every day Turks keep saying there's talks. Every day Ukraine says nothing. Every day Russia says they're talking with Ukraine. Now and again, there will be results. Now, last time the talks resulted in Ukraine agreeing to take 1,000 bodies. They handed over 19 dead Russians, then didn't take the bodies. Then the UN took the bodies. And now, a month later, they're still struggling to identify the bodies, even though they have the dog tags and the uniforms. And apparently, of course, what's happened is bodies have decayed. Situation made worse by Ukraine not accepting help from the outside. Apparently, this is to hide how many people have actually died, and also accusations by families that Ukraine is delaying on purpose the release of death notices to prevent payment, particularly after US aid has dried up. Now, it's not entirely dried up. Civilian aid continues. It is military aid. Now, is Ukraine siphoning off military aid to its civilian commitments? Or is the death benefits a grey area, or simply they never accounted for this many deaths? The questions pile up every day. I think Russia's made mistakes by not accepting the fact that no matter what, Zelensky is the leader of Ukraine, even if he is illegitimate in the eyes of the Ukrainian courts. That's between Russia. That's not between Russia and Ukraine. That's between Ukraine, the courts, and the people. And ultimately, even outsiders have questioned, and perhaps it's not in our best interest to question this rather than bog us down in semantics. We go, well, the quickest solution is perhaps the best solution, and that is to accept a limited authority as the Ukrainian courts and parliament allows for under national emergency, and put this to a parliamentary vote. But they won't hold a parliamentary vote. And then Zelensky says, the parliament's voting. Zelensky says the quiet part out loud where he controls the parliamentary vote anyway. Yet, continuously, New York Times, Washington Post, ABC, CNN, all claim Russia's the one not talking, when we have documented from Turkey. Now, I know a lot of people don't like this, but the news in Europe is lockstep in the EU. It's not independent. It's just as bad as Russian news. So we're running out of independent sources. And that's a bad thing. However, as you go through the news, allegedly there was a offensive yesterday that I missed, but it wasn't on the maps. It was reported and then taken down by the Kyiv Independent. They routinely do this, which is why I don't touch them. And usually why the Kyiv Independent will post a story, it's not because it's a lie. There probably was an offensive, but they took it down an hour later probably because it was crushed. See, Russia's not the only ones who can lose large numbers in a single rocket attack. But we only get one-sided news out of Ukraine. And that's the biggest problem. Now, it's rare for them to show, but does that fire look normal or natural to you? Well, that's actually because that's a gas fire. You see, ever seen flames coming out of the ground like that? Well, what's happened is that is extinguishing foam, and that's a gas pipe that's been fractured. That's probably and they're using, as you can see, chemical foam onto the fire, and the fire is literally pushing it back. It's heat radiance. You get that, I believe, at 500 degrees, where heat radiance is strong enough to actually push back. Personally, you feel it when you go near a fire. You actually do feel the radiance pushing on your hand. But I'm saying this rate at around 500, it starts to have enough force to push foam back, which is why firefighting is so hard sometimes. With gas fires, you have to silence the gas or extinguish it with a carbon dioxide. That's usually this foam breaks down the carbon dioxide, but this is a smothering foam, for chemical fires, not for gas fires. Which leads me to believe that Ukraine is either resource-starved or has lost veteran firefighters. Ukraine needs to decide its future, but for now, it seems to decide self-destruction on the unshakable belief, so far, that they can win this war. And this is reflected not just in Ukraine, but by Ukrainian supporters. By many people, however, are saying that it's Ukraine Nazis. Now, I am not in the politics of calling people I don't like Nazi. And I think we should just say Ukrainian nationalist, because they are not exactly strictly a Nazi party. They're not strictly a mirror image of the Nazis. They use a lot of tactics, but they also use a lot of tactics of the Soviet era socialists as well as modern anti-far tactics. They are nationalists, however. Ukrainian nationalists repeatedly attack Russian civilians with impunity, because most of Europe turns a blind eye. Most of the Ukrainian supporters turn a blind eye. If you are outraged by Russia's attacks, you have to be outraged by Ukrainian attacks. That's how sympathy works. Empathy is an ability to identify emotions. It's a poorly used and often misused word. Just because you have empathy doesn't mean you have sympathy. Russian Air Forces shot down air drones, and so has Ukraine. Now, Ukraine's claim we've shot down 59 of 84. This is a common tactic. As soon as every day they put out just a figure that doesn't seem to bear any reality on the ground. Now, Russia fired 3 guided missiles. Now, we don't, again, have confirmation because they don't show us. Now and again, the media will report on the Ukraine war and show some things. Sometimes they show them out of order, sometimes they show them in the wrong month, sometimes they show stuff a month later, but eventually we do start to actually get images of what's actually been hit as opposed to what they tell us was hit. Now, in regional security, again, bleating, lots of bleating, lots of name calling, lots of finger pointing, lots of people talking past people. We heard a lot about Russia and Belarus in their Zapad 25 military drills. Did you know China and India took part? See, there's a lot of stuff they won't tell you that's beyond the war. Now, apparently United States military observers were also there, which is standard practice, by the way. This is a lot of countries do this. You may hear that there's actually a Russian contingent of observers in Southern California. Now, and there's also Mexican observers. This is a way countries operate military drills. They often invite foreign media and foreign countries to observe, to say, not just to show off, but to actually say, this is a drill, not a war. Because we all remember what happened in 1939. Look what happened with that military drill. But there's an announcement of Greenland. The US did not send observers. Sign of trust. Or, as if, you Boy Scouts couldn't take Canada. But tariffs and sanctions, we're expecting a new round of sanctions. Trump is waiting on the economic report that the European Union is looking to legally leverage. They're not just looking for new ways. They're actually trying to legally leverage hundreds of billions of dollars of frozen assets to help Ukraine. There's no way around it. Okay, any attempt to use Russian money to help Ukraine is theft. Now, Zapad is actually the name of a Russian battle group, but it's also the name of what would you call it? I suppose you would say it's a military theatre. This is a anti-NATO military structure. This is, if NATO attacks, Zapad is the group that is supposedly sent to Belarus to stop a NATO invasion. Now, this was conducted near Belarus's capital, Minsk. This is a region that borders Poland and Lithuania. Poland, of course, has recently made noise about annexing Belarus to prevent, to secure Poland's borders. Wait a minute, isn't that what Russia did to... isn't that what the USSR did in 1939 to secure their borders against Poland? See, this is the problem, folks. History does tend to repeat because people go, oh, look, this lie worked once before. But yeah, India took part in, not as observers, but took part in the military operations as part of their commitment to defending the Russian Federation against NATO aggression. Your ally India, everybody, training to fight against you. China's ally, Ukraine. Well, technically they may no longer be an ally. They actually haven't formalised anything since 2014. But since 2014, they've been waiting for China to move in with Belt and Road, to build rail lines, to build gas pipelines. I'm not going to say the obvious. Well, actually, I should. Ukraine shouldn't hold their breath for their Chinese allies to come to aid them. Yet everybody seems to think it was the US who signed the agreement. No, they just co-signed the agreement to basically say, yeah, we witnessed this document. In what Jefferson warned you about with foreign war entanglements, that they'll find a way to drag you into their wars. France and Indochina. Even though we all knew France was in the wrong. Well, there was a big fire in Kyiv, and actually there were multiple fires in Kyiv. Now, one of them was allegedly building a house. They say it's a household and building goods retailer. Yeah, they were building drones. They're actually warehousing as well, with building material for barracks and other things. In a wartime, you can pretty much guarantee almost anything to do with hardware, a lot of shopping malls, any large warehouse is going to be militarized in some way or some fashion. You really need, if there is to be rules of war, there really needs to be clear rules of war, and basically Ukraine is about as transparent as mud, clear as mud. Yes, it's much better. Not very transparent with the information. However, this is clear that there's fighting, the alleged offensive. Yeah. Just drone attack. No. So we don't know whether or not the Kyiv Independent made a mistake, or 24 or within an hour of their launching the attack against Belgrade, not Belgrade, trying to launch another incursion in Kursk, that they got annihilated. Same here, they really doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason beyond keeping the Ukrainians bogged down to keep fighting here on the north, though there doesn't seem to be any significantly reported progress, with the fighting still going on north of Kupiansk. But Russia's clearly taken the northern quarter of Kupiansk, and one block, see the yellow area, those are the administration centres, those are where these are the key areas of the city. So we'll see what happens over the next 24, 48 hours there. But Kyiv is no doubt going to launch a counterattack there. But they are also really dealing with a Russian offensive north of Neumann, though that seems to be stalled. Same with the offensive north of Silvesk. There was a missile attack on Kremensk. Now, most of this area, there is actually fighting, but it's gone nowhere. And Ukraine claims to have retaken a town, Panviska, that we'll see in 24 hours if they can hold it, because we've seen Ukrainian offensives before. Again, it's possible that the Kyiv Independent took the story down because they wrote Kursk. And I'm not saying they made a mistake, but it's possible that while they were writing, they actually got an autocorrect. It happens a lot of the time. Autocorrect failures. It could have been an autocorrect failure. We don't know yet. We probably never know. But within 24 hours, most of these offensives are stalled, stopped, or killed. Now, the Russian offensives, however, are stalled in a lot of areas. And whatever gains they had in Novoyansk is allegedly wiped out. But then again, a lot of these areas are actually not stationed troops. There's a lot of gaps between the troops. And there could be a switching up. We don't know what. Ukraine, again, is not very forthcoming with information. But throughout the battle, now and again, Russia has proven that they can conduct long-range strikes and rapid advances. Now, yesterday I thought that they would go for here, but by going into a cauldron first. Nope. They just raced in and seized the positions. So clearly, Ukraine is starting to buckle, and Russia's head-on assaults through the roads are starting to work. However, they are taking other areas. So Ukraine conducting the offensive one area has been severely countered by Russia taking more territory elsewhere. Eventually they'll be fighting in Elvininka and all the way south to... and we'll see whether or not I'm right in that if I was the Russian battlefield commander, I'd be looking at the flow of logistics to Orsk and going, why would I want to fight all of this when I can fight up to here and start drawing troops off here, and these commanders will be able to go straight for here, and basically the Ukrainian army will be caught between a rock and a hard place because there's no crossfire. Without troops, any crossfire would be Ukrainian troops trying to maintain the horseshoe in the here if Russia was to come through here. But then again, there could be too much pressure from here, which means Russia probably has to go through this road to cut off the south. And there's enough distance between the two military points. But again, it depends on what they do up here. Do they go for Izum to cut off Lyman? Or they go up to here and then come through here and still achieve the same thing, cutting them off? Well, not entirely. They still have this road network, but it reduces greatly. It cuts off, puts everything within 70 miles in range of Russian missile artillery. But again, a lot of it's shaped by the battlefield. See, initially I thought the Russians were going to come up here. They've decided to come straight through the towns, which they are bogged down in. There's no doubt they're bogged down. And we probably see the extent of the fire. Probably don't get... That's every day of a shopping centre, a factory. They're all hubs. They're all logistical hubs. They tell you even that they are logistical hubs. And look at the extent of some of the fires. They leave you to believe that it's just an attack on civilians, and one civilian was killed in all of that. And Trump's the only one who's called bullshit on it so far. Well, you know what I mean. But look at this twisted mess of steel, and we do not know what exactly they hit. But the explosion triggered multiple fires for a wide area, which probably means they hit gas, okay, or an ammunition dump. Look at the size of that explosion. Look at the size of those fires and explosions. That's an 11-story building. You're telling me that they hit a civilian target, but yet these buildings stand, and no, they hit the rail yards. They hit ammunition and incoming trains at the rail yards. That's the explosion on the shopping centre. You ever see the shopping centre explode that much? Yeah, you wouldn't want to shop there if it's that dangerous. But they started a fire elsewhere. Look at the tower. You're telling me that's a civilian area? Come on. Okay, they probably hit a communications hub or a chemical factory. Who knows? Because they never tell you. But yeah, now and again, missiles do hit buildings. I'm not naive. But most of the time, people forget that Ukraine is striking Russian oil, trying to drive up the price of oil. Now, I said this earlier. Here's the backup story. Reuters, Ukraine is struggling to identify thousands of soldiers. So don't tell me that Ukraine is suffering losses. Ukraine is covering up for their losses, but it's getting harder and harder. But yeah, there's talk of sanctions. Again, they're finding trouble to enact sanctions because they've already sanctioned everything and nothing's changed. They are looking at individuals and secondary sanctions, trying to not say we're sanctioning India, but looking for Russian businessmen doing business in Russia, they're looking for Russian businesses and Russian businessmen doing business in Dubai, and other parts of the Emirates and Saudi Arabia and India and China, and trying to sanction those individuals. That way they can say, we're not sanctioning China. Because, heaven forbid, you cut off all those cheap goods that you set, and put the wankers out of business who are profiting off this war. However, Marco Rubio stated the US leader still believes that peace is possible. However, that at some point he may come to a conclusion that it's impossible to settle the Ukraine crisis, but he's still trying. Asked about a red line, and no, won't yet. Why? Because you know what happens, right? Look at Obama and his red line. Look at Biden and his 4 years of inactivity. Russia only has to wait out Trump, in their mind. But I think if the midterms go Trump's way, Russia's deep in trouble. Because there's going to be a clear message. There's no longer going to be moral ambiguity. There's no longer having to rely on 12 to 24 Republicans pretending to be... Democrats pretending to be Republicans. No, they're going to be a clear... see, because Europe can't sanction India and China and be effective. But Russia knows for a fact US sanctions on China have been effective and that China's economy is on the ropes, and that cutting India would be deep. India and China are not just providing, but here's why they won't. This is why Europe doesn't want sanctions on India. India provides the cheap diesel to Ukraine. But Ukraine has ordered all Indian orange fuel to be checked for Moscow-linked oil components. It's virtue signalling. Just petty politics. Okay? Daily volume about 2,700 tonnes. Consider the Battle of the Bulge, for instance, was 3 million litres of diesel. It tells you, and they're using... That tells you how low conflict this is compared to one major battle of World War II. Of course, Ukrainian oil markets have pointed out that India is only 15.5% of diesel imports. Modi, of course, is giving the middle finger to the West. Trump has put a penalty on India. Hasn't made any change so far. EU, of course, is wanting. Isn't it amazing how they keep seesawing between sanctions bad, tariffs bad, sanctions good, tariffs good, and keep going around in circles? But Modi just said, F you, we're going to do it anyway. We're going to continue doing it, putting our own economic priorities ahead of morals, because they don't believe in morals. Oh, I don't know if Trump is doing this because he doesn't want a misunderstanding, or because it is irrelevant. But Trump's shooters' Ukrainian links have been brought up in court. The trial of Donald Trump's second would-be assassin has begun today. A few hours yesterday, I believe. They had had a hearing. A few seem to care about the Ukrainian connection, but prosecutors were told that unless it's relevant, don't bring it up. Now, Russia seems to think it is relevant, that it goes to how Roth was radicalized, and the conspiracy to smear Donald Trump using Russia, and that Ukrainian nationalists stirred up Ryan Roth in order to put pressure on Trump to continue financial support of Ukraine. If that's true, that's I would say that's shouldn't hold that against Ukraine, but Zelensky and his secret police. I think we have to be very careful in our response to Russia as well, in that every leader from the BRICS nations, well, BRICS is destabilizing fast, but 9 of the 12 BRICS leaders are either now facing political turmoil. Indonesia, China for the last. We now know why China's broke. China's been making trillions of dollars, but they've been engaged in a secret aid program known as Belt and Road, and well, they've poured lots of money into countries. But these countries, their rail networks can't generate the wealth. Don't forget, these countries, they're not charging Western rail freight rates. Okay, they're rail companies, most of which aren't profitable. Most of the world isn't profitable. Most of the world, 30% of the world's propped up by foreign aid. That's why most of the world's still poor, because it's so dependent on foreign aid that they deliberately deflate their economies to maintain that foreign aid. China has deliberately deflated its economy to keep enough people in China poor so that they still qualify for foreign aid. It's built into Africa's budget. It's built into the budget of half the Middle East. While the other half of the Middle East, India still gets foreign aid. And they've got a bloody nuclear navy. It's about time foreign aid went to countries based on their GDP, not based on how many poor people they got. Force those countries to rebuild their internal economies, to be not dependent on foreign aid. But that comes down to Ukraine. Ukraine is dependent on US aid, and I think that's what blew the support. I think this was the turning point for Ukraine's support. And soon, Ukraine will be losing more support in Europe as people look at their own crumbling economies and say, why are we fighting in a war in Ukraine when it's going to be back to the same situation over and over again, like the conflict between Cambodia and Thailand, like the conflict in Sudan, like the conflict in the Middle East. It's just going to keep coming back to bite us because because people in those countries know they could just start up a war again and that some muppet will come along, whether it's China, India, Russia, or America, or other European countries, come along and start supplying arms. Until the people of Ukraine realise that we're not going to fund your conquest of the Donbass, and that there's going to be that's why you look at Korea, you look at Japan and Taiwan, you look at many places where we have achieved peace, and it's because they know we're not going to come in and support their wars. We'll defend them, but we're not going to allow them to be aggressive again. And Japan is probably a greater success story, and I honestly admire the Japanese for their turnaround. I used to admire the Koreans until they started electing commies. I'm worried about the Taiwanese electing commies. But Japan is turning things around again, strengthening their ties with the West. Now I think it's up to us as individuals that we should work with our friends and allies around the world to de-escalate, help get our allies out of debt, not for cut spending, okay, cut costs, and quite frankly, cut out the war profiteers. Look at Jeff Bezos and how much he makes off contracts in the Department of War. That's totally putting your thumb on the scale. And he pours millions of dollars into Democrats. We need to, if you're serious about ending radicalization, you have to cut off those who fund radicalization. You have to get rid of... Well, I'm not saying that Amazon has to go. I'm saying that Jeff Bezos and all these contracts to these criminals, and RICO acts against them, force the sale of their companies to others, and basically cut off these people for funding radicals. Because they're using radicals as a way of gatekeeping wealth to themselves and keeping the right-wingers down. And they're also abusing the fact that they keep telling you it's a free market when it's not, when government contracts are what's created Microsoft and IBM and Amazon, and along the way you had others who've basically invested into the blue chip stocks of Apple and all these others because they knew. Why were they blue chip? Because they knew blue chip. They were earmarked by the Democrats as protected at any cost. They weren't miracles of Wall Street. They were miracles of government contracts and wars. You want to cut the radicals? Cut the war to Ukraine and see what happens. Because the Ukrainian radicals, they're only going to drag us in endless wars until they've killed... And they're not going to learn until their own country's destroyed. At least the Italians in World War II had a wake-up call and realised that they were headed down the wrong direction. Maybe it'll happen in Ukraine. You never know. But it won't happen until we put our foot down and say, no, we're not here to deliver you your promised land. We're here to cut the cancer and say east goes east and west goes west, and there shall be a line between that neither will cross. And Ukraine's going to sit there with their arms folded. But Canada ruined peacekeeping back in the Sudan, Mogadishu, sorry. That was, that's the problem with liberals and liberalism, is they can't reconcile their beliefs to what they want. They want to use the force of government, but then they nanny-pandy and hippy-dippy, and they want the right to do all the heavy lifting, and then the left swoop in and take the credit and dump all the wars and all the conflicts and all the ugly mess onto the Republicans. And this is what they're trying to do in Ukraine. So we have to end this war. We have to end this war before it turns into a conflagration. And in the end, it's going to be China having destroyed half the world and Russia destroying its, between China, Russia and India and the United States, most of the world will be destroyed. We know China was gearing for war. Now, they don't know what to do because everything's falling apart for them. Their plans was to have Russia bog us down in Eastern Europe, but Trump came to office. China wants to control the chip industry, the electric car industry, and every other industry. And the rest of the world is starting to realise that, no, we can't have that happen. We need jobs, and China's saying, no. That's not how it works. You become vassal states, importing everything from us. People are starting to wake up to the Chinese ambition. And Ukraine was just an experiment by China, and once they've finished with them, they abandoned them. And Ukraine is, again, taking out its frustrations on Russia. You abandoned us. This is the selfish, naive child that Ukraine is. They can't accept responsibility for their poor choices. And now they want to be Captain Sky Shield of Europe because they see that generous EU money and think that they become the permanent recipient of NATO funding to be the bulwark against the Russians. So they go around stirring the Ruski threat. And they have been for a decade. Yet most of Europe has ignored it because the old folk want the Cold War, yay! Because they need to externalise their anger instead of pointing fingers at Macron. They can point fingers and blame Russia instead of blaming the mass migration, all the crime on the migrants who commit the crimes. Blame their economic failures on Russia instead of their own laziness and taking off massive holidays and wanting massive pay rises which don't match, which create a huge wealth gap between you and the rest of the world, which makes building in China even more favourable. But that's because capitalists, and then they say, capitalists only want to eat you up and spit you out. Well, those capitalists are China, not France. What capitalists? No, you have to mix a good, healthy dose of nationalism. Europe has gone too far to the left, and we've got to drag it back to the right, and ending the Ukraine war will do that. Ukraine can have its nationalism, but not its ultranationalism, not its national pride where they think that they are entitled to our pocket money. Even Poland is starting to realise that I didn't say total exclusion from... Poland didn't say total exclusion from the EU, but they said it'll take at least 20 years to clean up Ukraine's act. That's a quiet estimation, and that sounds about right. Clean up Ukraine's act. Put in a big buffer zone between Ukraine and Russia, and you'll see, when both sides can't fight... If this is the problem, isn't it? Both sides, Ukraine refuses to talk, refuses to make concessions, refuses to acknowledge the fact that, they won't negotiate. And I think, why not just get Trump to come in with a big marker pen, trace down the line and say, East goes east, West goes west. This land in between is the US and NATO or whoever. And basically all the Chinese and all the Indians in Eastern... What was Ukraine cozying up to India when India's cozying up to Russia? Ukraine doesn't make sense. They're just so enamored with making money that they don't realise that they're getting played for fools. And the biggest problem is Zelensky. Thank you for watching. Please like, share and subscribe. And please support the channel. You can support me on Patreon, buy my books, buy my merch. All my links are in the link tree, description below. Or scan the QR code in my profile, or scan the QR code on the screen. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.